It finally happened. The Montreal Canadiens traded Jeff Petry. Hi everybody, welcome to Langer at the Mic. I'm Mike Langer. You know what's up. After he requested a trade midway through last season, and after months of off-season speculation leading up to the draft, leading up to the start of free agency, the Montreal Canadiens finally traded Jeff Petry along with Rem Pitlick to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Michael Matheson and a 2023 fourth-round pick. We're going to break it all down right here, and we're going to do it in three ways by looking at the good, the bad, and the great parts of this Jeff Petry trade. So let's start with the good. The good is that Kent Hughes made a deal that benefits both Jeff Petry and his family, as well as the Montreal Canadiens. Obviously, the biggest part of this trade is that they did not have to retain any of Jeff Petry's salary. He has 3 years left at a cap hit of $6.25 million. And there was reportedly a deal in place for Petry to go to the Dallas Stars, but the Stars were forcing the Canadiens to retain some salary, whereas the Pittsburgh Penguins were not forcing the Habs to retain any of Petry's salary. So the fact that they were able to move Petry without retaining any of his cap hit is a big win for the Montreal Canadiens. But what's an even bigger win is that they get a very solid, established NHL defenseman in return in Mike Matheson. He's from the West Island of Montreal, so a hometown kid. Well, not a kid at this point. He's 28 years old. He was a stud on the Lac St. Louis Lions way back in the day at the midget AAA level, and he has had some issues with consistency thus far, but he can handle top minutes and can play in a similar role that Jeff Petry played in. He also has 4 years left at $4.875 million. And he's 28 years old, as I mentioned. Great skater, great athlete, already, again, established in the NHL. Just if he could be a little bit more consistent, he can definitely be maybe not a number one defenseman, but a very good second pair defenseman. Long story short, Mike Matheson, hometown kid from Montreal, younger, cheaper than Jeff Petry, and can play in a similar role, while Jeff Petry gets to go to the US and play in Pittsburgh behind Chris Letang. The bad of this trade, though, is that Mike Matheson, although he's, again, a fine NHL defenseman, he is, however, a left-handed shot, adding to the redundancy of left-handed defensemen that the Canadiens already have in their system. And that could prevent favorable opportunities for Caden Gooley, Jordan Harris, Matthias Norlinder, and Arber Xhekaj. And that's the reason why the Canadiens were able to trade Romanov, is because of that depth, or that young depth that they had on the left side of their blue line. And now by bringing in Mike Matheson, he'll allow these guys a little more of a chance to develop, but he could also get in the way of favorable opportunities for them, and also maybe even force them to play on the right side. And that's the question, is could Mike Matheson play on the right side? And even a bigger question, because now the Canadiens still have a huge hole at right defense. Yeah, they have David Savard. Yeah, they have Chris Weidman. Yeah, they have Justin Barron, but they have a huge hole to fill on their top pair on the right side of their blue line. And that's where my question is, could they have done the John Marino trade that the New Jersey Devils did? And here's a shout out also to Lemonhead, who mentioned this in my comments a couple days ago by bringing up John Marino as a possible trade from Pittsburgh. And I wrongly responded by saying that Marino is a prime second pairing defenseman behind Chris Letang on a good contract, and that Pittsburgh has no business moving him. And again, boy, was I wrong, because the Penguins did trade him to New Jersey for Ty Smith and a third-round pick. Now, John Marino is even younger than Matheson at 25 years old, has a slightly cheaper cap hit at $4.4 million per season AAV, but has 5 years left, so an extra year compared to Matheson. But the big thing is he is right-handed and has been a solid defenseman for Pittsburgh in the last few years. Again, eating up big minutes, just behind Chris Letang, so he could also be more than capable of being a number one defenseman on a rebuilding team like the Montreal Canadiens right now, allowing for Justin Barron on the right side to develop, and of course allowing Caden Gooley and Jordan Harris and Arbor Xhekaj and maybe even Matthias Norlinder the time to develop and the opportunity to establish roles on the left side of the blue line. But again, given the return that Ty Smith ended up getting from New Jersey, or given the return of Ty Smith and a third-round pick, Ty Smith still has pretty decent upside. He was a pick in the 2018 draft. So, given that return of Ty Smith and a third-round pick, the Montreal Canadiens would have likely had to have added either more value or possibly take on another bad contract from Pittsburgh. Plus, Pittsburgh probably did the Marino trade so that they could accommodate the Petry for Matheson trade. And of course, arguably the worst part of this trade is that the Canadiens had to give up on Rem Pitlick, who seemingly has the tools to develop into a very reliable bottom six forward, but just hasn't happened in Montreal. And that's just another failure of a first round pick by the Montreal Canadiens in the last decade. But again, none of that is really it's not really on Kent Hughes. That's just more on the downside of Marc Bergevin. Marc Bergevin did a lot of great trades to the Montreal Canadiens. He built the roster as well as he could through free agency and through trades, but the downside of that, of course, was that he left the Canadiens in a very difficult cap situation, and Kent Hughes had to make the most of that bad cap situation that the Canadiens are still in. But before we get to a little bit more on that, let's talk about the greatest part about this Jeff Petry trade to Pittsburgh. And the best part is that Kent Hughes and the Montreal Canadiens did right by Jeff Petry and his family, because they had every right to keep Jeff Petry under contract, and they could have forced him to play in Montreal, even though deep down he might have been able to be a professional and dealt with it and still did the best he could in Montreal. But deep down he wanted to play elsewhere because it would have made better sense for his family. Playing in the US would have been a lot more beneficial for Petry and his family, and the Canadiens could have still forced him to play in Montreal, kind of like what the Jets are doing with Pierre-Luc Dubois right now. Instead, Kent Hughes did everything he could to accommodate Jeff Petry and his family, and that's something that players, not only on the Montreal Canadiens, but around the National Hockey League will take notice in, because it could make Montreal an even more attractive place to play, since Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon, by trading Jeff Petry, have made it clear that they will make it a point to accommodate and look out for their players' best interests, which, again, active players on the Montreal Canadiens will take notice in, and players around the league will take notice in, or could take notice in, and would definitely appreciate. And last but not least, the very best part about the Jeff Petry trade is that with a little bit of cap space that it opened up, the $1 or close to $2 million difference between Jeff Petry's contract and Mike Matheson's contract, is that it allowed the Montreal Canadiens to sign Rem Pitlick to a steal of a deal. Now, I obviously made a video about Rem Pitlick not being qualified as an RFA, but it all makes perfect sense right now, because they avoided arbitration, which could have gotten Rem Pitlick close, maybe north of $3 million per season. So they avoided arbitration. They got Pitlick signed to a 2-year deal at an AAV of $1.1 million, just short term, allowing Rem Pitlick to prove himself. He's an unrestricted free agent after that deal expires, so if he wants to cash in on a big contract, he can. If the Habs want to keep him, they could possibly extend him before his contract expires. So again, really nice that the Canadiens, by getting the Petry move out of the way, were able to bring back Rem Pitlick. So now what though? Now what? The Petry trade is done. Rem Pitlick is signed. So now what? Well, Kent Hughes, Jeff Gordon, they can't possibly be done yet, since the Montreal Canadiens still have 15 forwards competing for 12 active forward spots on the roster, and they're still very tight against the salary cap right now. So That would likely mean that Christian Dvorak, Josh Anderson, maybe even Mike Hoffman, maybe Paul Byron, maybe Jonathan Drouin. I think it's more likely Dvorak, Anderson, or Hoffman. It is very likely that one of those three or more players could be moved to open up spots on the roster and to create extra much needed cap space going into next year. But what do you think of the Jeff Petry trade? Do you think it was really good? Do you think the Canadiens could have still waited and gotten maybe a little bit more in return? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, I just want to acknowledge that I previously made a video predicting what a possible Jeff Petry trade could look like, and let's just say I overestimated Petry's value by quite a bit. But to be fair, in my defense, that was also before the Ryan McDonagh trade and the Brent Burns trade and the Max Pacioretty trade, which pretty much devalued everything for everyone. But as usual, thank you so much for watching. Hit like, hit subscribe, tell your friends and family about Langer at the Mike. You can give me a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Mike Langer for both. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next time. Go Habs, go.